Good evening and welcome to Shop Talk, hosted by the Triangle Area SQL Server Users Group. Shop Talk is a show for viewers. Drop your questions in chat. Get answers to questions from noted expert Mala Mahadevan. In progress, drinking water.
Hello.
Noted expert Tracy Baggiano, not drinking water.
Hello.
And noted yokel, this guy. So, tonight, we've got a couple items on the agenda, but if you have questions anytime in chat, drop them in. Love to talk about questions you've got, thoughts you have. This is a chat-driven show. If you have questions outside of Shop Talk, send us an email, shoptalk@tripass.org. So, for this evening, our first topic, Mala wanted something that would be incendiary enough, and so we picked ORMs because that's a topic which goes over extremely well in a data platform discussion. So specifically, working with ORMs, Icon Pro says thank you, Mala. Yeah, you're probably gonna rile somebody up. It may not even be me tonight. Might be somebody else who gets riled up. But what are your experiences working with ORMs, Mala?
So I have not worked with a big variety of them. I have worked with the most common ones. That's NHibernate, and what's the other one?
Entity
there's
framework?
one more. Entity framework. Yes. Sorry. Thank you, Kevin. So those are the two I worked with, and my experiences with it have not been positive. Most of the time, it created horrendous queries. Most of the time, your ability to fix what it was doing was very limited. And I could go on, but that was kind of it. And there was one shop where they did just basic CRUD operations, like a really small mom and pop place where I've seen it put to use. They could not afford a data person. They only had a programmer doing everything. So in that kind of a very compact world, it really works. I can understand that they had a tool writing their queries for them, and that worked out fine. But the use case for that was really small. Otherwise, it's been a horror story. And I've learned people talk, like Grant Ritchie, talk about best practices around it, like don't use views, use direct tables, don't treat tables like objects, all that kind of stuff, which makes total sense to me. And that's what we at Channel Advisor have been trying to some extent, do to make the usage more optimal. Where we are, we haven't really moved a lot there yet, but we know what to do at least. That's pretty much it. I know these things are here to stay. They're not going to go away because data folks don't like them. So that's the reason I brought up this topic, is how best we as data people work around this thing. So all yours, Kevin.
Well, let me bounce it to you, Tracy. What are your thoughts?
They're terrible sometimes. The times I've seen them the worst is when they'll send in a query 500 times as they're pulling back individual records. Like they'll pull back 500 customers instead of pulling them back up like one big query. And because somebody didn't set it up right in Entity Framework to connect all the tables together to get the data back in one record set. And that's horrible to a database to send that many requests to it. And then, of course, the application is going to be slower too because it's got to process that many. So if somebody knows what they're doing and get it set up properly, it runs better, but it still is not the best way to do it, I think.
Yeah, no, I get that. So Icon Pro says, wish he could talk. There's a lot to say. It's fair. DBAs don't like dynamic queries. Yeah, I think that's a reasonably fair statement. There's a lot more complexity to them. So I think that's fair. I'm gonna try to take the other side on this, which is difficult because I think all three of us on here are reasonably opposed to ORMs in most environments. But let me start small, build up. So starting with Mala's case, yeah, that makes a lot of sense where you have a shop where you don't have a data platform person, but you also don't have a huge amount of data. Well, an ORM can make a lot of sense. I mean, it can save quite a bit of development time. I want to take a slight diversion into groups of ORMs, and Icon Pro's getting into that a little bit. And I do want to talk about there are much more heavyweight and much more lightweight ORMs. An example, heavyweight, we talked about Entity Framework, we talked about in Hibernate. The idea here is essentially to turn a relational database into an object-like store, and object-like storage, to be able to reduce the burden of having to understand multiple languages, that shifting from C# to SQL and back to C#, working in a relational paradigm where you're thinking set-based to an object-oriented paradigm, dealing with the, much as I hate the term, impedance mismatch problem. So to answer Mala's question in chat, no, Dapper is not like Entity Framework at all. It's actually the other side of what I'm talking about. Entity Framework in Hibernate, these are very heavyweight. They are going to try to replace interaction with the database. Dapper is what is called a micro ORM. Essentially, its job is a simple wrapper on top of ADO.NET. So ADO.NET, how you interact with the database from .NET. Active data objects, if I remember right. And is little more than a couple of methods that say, open a connection, open a command, execute some script that somebody has written. So Dapper's mindset is you have somebody who has written that SQL, you have somebody who's written a stored procedure, who has written a query, and we're going to execute this query that has been written. Entity Framework in Hibernate, their mantra is much more of cover the SQL, translate to the SQL, but have everything live in a C# world, where even with something like link, I could write a C# link statement that then gets translated to SQL. In its ideal form, a tool like Entity Framework can work pretty well. The problem is that as data models get complex, as data quantities get complex, as query demands get complex, it can be easy to end up writing things that do not perform well. A classic example of this is something called the N+1 problem, where essentially I have 100 things, 100 records, and I make one call to get the 100 records, and then I make one call for every record to get some sub-record. That means I have 101 database calls, when in the relational world we would generally think, oh, I join those two tables together and I get back all the data in one call. So that is going to perform much better in almost every case than the N+1 separate database calls. I say almost every case just because I'm sure someone can come up with some weird edge case where it doesn't work better. But almost always. So we have this sort of problem that can pop up as you get larger data sets and more complex data models. Sticking to things like CRUD, absolutely, Entity Framework can save a lot of time. If it's just simple insert, update, delete, those operations are really easy to do. And if you have a reasonable data model, save operation works really well. Read operations can be a bit trickier, but still can perform well enough. The issue becomes when you have rather complex data models with joining 24 tables together and needing to try to performance tune the spaghetti that gets generated from Entity Framework. And that's where I really want to say, you know what? Why don't you just have that code live in stored procedures? So Entity Framework can call stored procedures. Dapper is built around calling stored procedures. A lot of the micro ORMs actually use stored procedures as an interface, essentially saying, give me the structure of the result set you're going to generate, and I will create code off of that and expose it to the developers. My favorite micro ORM is called fsharp.data.sql client. It is specific to F#. It has its limitations. Trust me, I've found many of its limitations. But where it is really good is I can have a stored procedure and it will generate a record type based off of that stored procedure result set. So, or a set of record types based off of the results. So it's pretty easy to integrate in, and especially in a functional world, I think that tie-in with the relational database actually works extremely well. So the name of it is fsharp.data.sql client. It is a NuGet package specifically for F#. C# support is not there. You'd have to write your library in F#. That comes with its own world of fun and joy and everything nice. Definitely not a lot of pain. Not a ever-increasing amount of pain as you find inconsistencies between the two languages. I blame C#. But so you have those two differing styles. The micro ORM of basically I'm going to be a light wrapper that's going to be really fast and will run this query with relatively little overhead, but you are going to have to write the SQL code for this. Versus Entity Framework and Hibernate of, well, we're going to leave everything in one language and we'll write the SQL code for this, but it may not end up being that fast. So coming back on chat, Icon Pro talking about how Dapper is a micro ORM, create a generic collection from a SQL query. Absolutely, yep. It's just essentially creating a thin object on top of your results. Entity Framework, code first or database first. That's a good point. I should talk about this for a second. Entity Framework has this notion called code first, where you create objects and it will create the database underneath. Generally, don't do that. Generally, that's a really bad idea. It ends up creating really bad data models because your object data model shouldn't necessarily look like a relational structure and vice versa. So you end up with a mushy combination of the two. And that leads to problems down the road with performance, with problems in so lack of normalization can cause update anomalies. Not great, not a great solution. By contrast, database first essentially says you've created a database model. We're going to review this and generate the code objects to interact between the database model and the code base. That's the route that I would take if I'm using Entity Framework. So Solomon says, I don't think the issue is as much the dynamic query nature of ORMs as it is the fact that any query generated cannot be optimized as the code is coming from a place outside the DBA's control instead of within the DB where we can fix those things relatively quickly. That's a good point. When you are developing code, when you're developing SQL from code, if you need to performance tune it, you're modifying code. Now you're going to have to build your code, you're going to have to deploy your code, you'll have to run through all of those tests. It can slow down the process. By contrast, performance tuning a query in a stored procedure can be done with a lot less overhead. You can lock down ORMs with stored procedures. Yes, definitely a good idea to do that. I mean, I like stored procedures in general. Even if you are using an ORM, stored procedures act as an interface layer. So they're going to essentially say, here is the contract with this database call. you are going to get back these outputs if you give me these inputs. And that lets developers write against it pretty easily. It also allows for modification of what is behind that contract without having to modify everything upstream too. So if you don't have a stored procedure, if you have a SQL query that you're generating from, say, a link statement, if you have any sort of table change, that table change is now necessitating a code change. If you have any sort of query tuning you need to do, code change. You're tying together multiple layers in a way that you don't necessarily need to. How often is stored procedure as ORM layer used? Depends on the interface. If you're talking entity framework, not incredibly often. I know people who will use it, but generally not. If you're talking about Dapper or other micro ORMs, almost always. Because the other option is you're writing SQL queries as strings inside your code. And I think a lot of developers understand that's not a great solution either. You could go crazy and do link queries instead of SQL queries. Yeah, this is actually an area where you will run into problems with Entity Framework because it makes that easy, but you can end up in performance pain because the link queries don't translate perfectly. It translates pretty well if you have a fairly simple data set. If I'm looking in the set of classes, I've got a bunch of classes and maybe I have students, and I can join students and classes and understand under the covers, oh, that's an inner join. And I can do a filter. And it can do that sort of fairly well. But as you have more joins, as you do aggregations, as you do other link operations, I'm building out a functor here. And the end result is that the SQL query that gets generated is like 7 levels deep of nested subqueries, because that's how an entity framework generates the code, and the optimizer gives up and you scan the same tables a dozen times. That's a little bit hyperbolic, but it's not too far from the truth once you get to a more complex data model. So yeah, link statements are a trap when you get to more complex data models. When you're keeping it easy, again, if you are the only developer in a shop and you're talking about a database that has thousands or tens of thousands of rows in the largest tables, go for it. There's nothing that's going to slow you down there. When you're talking about millions of rows and you don't have the best hardware, at that point it's time to think about, can I do this a better way? And even if it just means taking some of the more complicated procedures and turn them into stored procedure calls, that compromise route may end up being your best option. Because for the insert, update, delete stuff, yeah, let an entity framework generate that for you. It's just a bunch of typing anyhow. For the more complex reads, you do it yourself. You can optimize it yourself, and you can understand the way execution plans are generated for this query. One of the things that I find most difficult, I'll harangue upon it a little bit again, is the queries, not even the query plans, the queries that are generated end up being such a rat's nest of subqueries. Like you've got subquery T1, inside of which is subquery T2, inside of which is subquery T3, which is T4 joined to T5 joined to T6, but T6 is actually a subquery of T1. And the ability to read that as a human and understand it can be a bit taxing. You can make mistakes. It's like, that's what Tracy was talking about. You can get some really nasty outputs. All right, so Mala says, not very often talk about using stored procedures. Devs feel it takes away from the advantage of an ORM.
Oh, well.
If you write queries that take down the server, you lose the privilege of using the ORM. This benefit of code first is migrations.
Just add a bit better. This is first of all, I only learned of using stored procedures at Channel Advisor. Before that, I didn't even know it was an option with an OR. So we talked about it briefly at work, and the thing was, at least in our work environment, what they said was like, if it has to be stored procedures, we might as well let you guys write all the queries first, which is typically what we do. But this perspective may be very specific to Channel Advisor, not everywhere. So I'm not saying no, everywhere that stored procedures should not be written, and there may be many developers, many environments that are amenable to using it that way.
Okay, yeah. The benefit of code first is its ability to do migration easily. I can get that. I can't get behind it very well. Just because at that point you're going to do one of two things. You're either you're doing one of three things. You create a relational database that's built on a bunch of objects, which isn't a great approach. You're going to create an object set that is essentially of copies of a relational world, which isn't that great either if you're really believing in objects, as opposed to just having some wrapper over your tables. Or you create a muddy mixture of the two. And I don't think any of those three options is really that great of an answer. I mean, as a relational extremist, I would take the second option, but that's not, as a developer, I don't want that. I don't want to have to join together several things to get what, like, a customer. I think of a customer object. If I have a customer object, it's going to have these attributes, and I don't want to have to think about joining together multiple tables or multiple classes. In the relational world, I'm happy with having multiple tables that in total represent a customer because they're at different levels of granularity. You know, we have things like phone numbers, addresses, things where you may have multiples. We may have a history, so you have historical information, you have current information, you have relationships with other people. These things, I don't want to store them in one table either. So there is that butting heads between what is a proper object model and what is a proper relational model. It feels like code first just tries to muddy that too much. It is funny how code first sucks when Django is based on that model. Yet Django, so it's funny you say that. I do use Django actually for my personal website. I've used Django for a good decade or so. That model works a lot better than EF, I think. But I also think Django was built for a specific use case. It was built for essentially, what was it? Like, for newspapers to publish articles. So for the Washington Post, for different newspapers to be able to publish articles on a website. In that sense, it was purpose-built for that as a content generation machine. And everything was tailored for that specific use case. So I think the decisions they made when developing Django really pushed them in that direction, and I think that helped out. I believe that's why that experience with Django feels a lot nicer than what you get with EF, where EF is intended as just any domain connecting your relational database to your .NET code. Recursive. Don't get me started on EF and recursive relationships. Yeah, that's just scary. PG says hi. Hello. Hello, Thomas. Code first is for the traveling coder, the person who gets run out of town on a rail or needs to escape ahead of the mob. Yeah. Please don't say anything about MongoDB. I try my best not to say anything about Mongo. Code first is also for the developer that won't share a database, creating a database on the fly. Basically, you check in code and run it, and it will create a database for you. Yeah, let me I don't know, take a side step. I don't think it's a step back, but I am supposed to be the person who's most friendly to ORMs in this discussion, just so that somebody can
I've
be.
notably revoked their permissions to be able to create a database to begin with as a DBA, so that could not have happened.
I mean, that's a fair point. If you're looking at a case where this is a one-off purpose-built database, and after the code base dies, the database goes with it, and it's low user count, and it's not important, then sure, that can work out well.
How much do you want to bet that gets created on their local machine and not on a server then? Just saying, I may have seen this happen before.
Yeah. Basically, it's a SQLite database.
No, it was SQL Server installed on their machine locally, and they created a database, and it was running a customer service application, built out entity framework. And then one day somebody discovered that it wasn't on a server. It was on a local desktop.
That's a risk. So Icon Pro, you mentioned it's like a SQLite database. That I think that's just where Compact Edition fits in. And if you're talking, I'm going to use EF to deploy to SQL Server Compact. That is a whole different use case. And at that point, I would say, okay, that actually sounds pretty cool. That's a reasonable use case for it. Guess which database is not supported in Django, and gives a link. I'm going to guess SQL Server, because up until recently, it not being a Linux supported product doesn't work. Also, I have actually tried Django on SQL Server on Linux. It did not work. So their documentation is correct. The Duke mentions having used SQL Alchemy from time to time. Yeah, that's a similar feeling to where if you're calling off of stored procedures, works. If you're calling off of relatively simple domains, you have a relatively simple model and you're not doing anything too crazy with it, works. I think where we get into trouble is complicated queries with large amounts of data. Just don't trust automated machines to write that for you. SQL Alchemy is EF-ish. It is a heavier world than your micro ORM. Quick, simple stuff for ML. Sure, if it's not production code, again, any warning I have, 60% of the warnings I have go out the window. That if it's just something you're writing for yourself, whatever. If it's something that I just need to get data really fast into this file or into this other database, write whatever comes up in mind, and it doesn't have to be maintainable. It doesn't necessarily have to perform well. If you're talking some process that you're going to run quite regularly, that's where we start asking questions. That's where you ask, is it the right choice? And the answer might be yes, it might be no. Perfect for proofs of concept. Goodbye, Tracy. We'll miss you.
I thought I had to sneeze, so I didn't want to do it on camera, and then it didn't happen. So,
welcome back, Tracy. We missed you. I worry when management start asking it to be in production. Right. Hey, remember that thing you used that one time to get data over here? We need it to run every day now. Yeah. So yeah, that's ORMs. You have closing thoughts, Mala, Tracy?
No, stay away from them if you can.
I like that. Stay away from them. I wish. No, I learned a lot from the chat as well as from what you said, Kevin. Thank you.
Yeah, and Icon Pro
and
recommends
I
Dapper.
will work hard.
Oh, go ahead, Mala.
No, I was saying I have to, push the cost of stored procedures a little bit more at work
They're useful. They're useful.
around.
Icon Pro
Yeah.
recommends using
Yeah.
Dapper. And yeah, Dapper is a great micro ORM. I tried to find a chart for tonight. There was one that I remembered. I was at a .NET user group meeting a couple years back at this point. They had a performance chart of different products, everything from like Entity Framework versions, going back to Link to SQL, in Hibernate versions, Dapper.
So is Django also micro ORM?
Django is a content management platform that was intended for newspapers. So it is an MVC-based
okay.
web service. It has built into it its own ORM that you can use. So yeah, different performance, everything from writing straight SQL queries against ADO.NET up to in Hibernate. And in Hibernate was slow. Entity Framework was slow. Link to SQL is worse than Entity Framework. They improved it with Entity Framework. So I don't want to slam EF unnecessarily. I will only slam it necessarily. But Dapper was way down at the bottom near micro ORM. Python micro would be something like Pony. All right, Pony I'm not familiar with. That'll be interesting to check out. But yeah, as close as you can get. If performance is important, then try to get as close as you can to just writing the actual SQL itself. If performance is not important, if ease of development is the most important thing, then move upward up the stack to something like Entity Framework, or I guess I wouldn't even say in Hibernate. I would just say Entity Framework if you don't want, or if you want that world of very heavy ORM. I don't think there's a huge benefit to using in Hibernate. But then again, I haven't used in Hibernate, so there may be some major benefits that I'm missing out on. But still, if you know SQL, it's gonna serve you better than relying on a tool to generate that for you. So Tracy.
Oh boy, my turn.
ponyorm.org. I will check that out after the stream. Thank you, the Duke. So Tracy, you have presentations. That was not the best transition. I'll admit that. You have presentations.
I do. I have a lot of them.
You have thoughts on presentations as well.
I think you have more presentations than I do.
Yes, but I'm moving the focus over to this session, this topic, which I'm probably going to lean on you for, so that there's the mandated 38 seconds of not me speaking during shop talk.
Okay, there's got to be at least some time. So the topic was going to be about tips about creating presentations or getting into presenting. So I don't know how many people would be interested in that, but certainly we talked about writing books and articles and all that stuff. I figured this might be a good topic to add. So
assume that everybody's interested, because I'm going to have all of these people speak for the user group.
Okay. Well, that's the first thing I'm saying. Just jump in head first. Pick you out a good topic that you either know really well or something that you want to know really well. That way you'll spend time researching it. And if you know it really well, you'll spend more time researching it to make a presentation.
Okay. On that, I also want to ask chat. Same question to chat. I'm going to ask Tracy. How often do you pick a topic that you don't know, but just want to learn?
I've done it twice out of like 7 presentations I've given.
Okay, so generally you'll pick something that you're already quite familiar with.
I'm at least familiar with, and then I have to go into more detail to do the presentation. I can do like half to 60% of the presentation without doing more research
Okay.
on most of them.
Okay, so you already feel like you've got a pretty solid base of confidence that I understand this well enough and I can get moving and fill in the gaps.
I done a couple where I was only at like 20, so. So I wanted to learn this, so I said I'm gonna, like the Azure presentation I did at Summit, maybe 0% when I submitted that one, because we didn't use Azure anywhere. But I was like, I wanted to learn Azure, so I was like, well, if somebody selects it as SQL Saturday or Summit, that gives me a good excuse to learn it. And then Summit selected it last minute, and I had to learn it.
It is a great way to learn. I haven't done a ton of presentations or anything, but during the times I have always found that it has enhanced my knowledge of the subject. For one thing, it forces you to research into what you're presenting. And the second thing is most questions, and you can actually learn. I've learned from every audience I've presented to something new about the topic.
Yeah, I learned something new. I edit the presentation almost every time I give it. There's something new in it or something I've changed based on feedback or something I learned just based off reading blog articles in between presenting.
Mm-hmm.
Because like my Query Store presentation, I've been doing it for 4 years now. It changes every time. Because there's always somebody's writing something new about it, and there's different examples to give, or I just come up with a different way to explain something. So, and then I would say too, find you somebody that can mentor you into speaking as well if you're doing it for the first time, instead of doing the head first thing like I did. Brian tricked me, but that was a different story. But
so when you're talking about mentoring, I know that you do mentoring of new speakers.
Yes, I do. I was going to mention that, but I've mentored a couple of speakers, and there's a website called speakingmentors.com where there's a whole bunch of people in the SQL community and outside the SQL community, not as many outside the SQL community that are listed as wanting to mentor people. And then you can just ask somebody that you like their style of presenting or present in the area that you're wanting to present in or on topic that you're presenting in. And they're more likely will say yes. They might say no and point you to someone else. And then you got a couple of conferences lately and some SQL Saturdays were doing it where they were doing new people tracks and hooking you up with mentors, because GroupBuy is doing it right now, where they're hooking people up with mentors. And then we had the new data stars that Mala was unfortunately not able to do because she had some problems there. She couldn't participate. So, but there's different things like that going on that you can get a mentor and get some help with your abstract, your presentation, presenting to people.
Yeah,
to that
sad. I had a help issue.
Yeah. So.
But we have plenty of opportunities in the SQL community for those who want to present, which is what, one of the great things about it is that there's never a shortage of places you want to present at. There's always somebody looking. And now with everything going virtual, there's even more opportunities than there used to be. Not just virtual chapters. Everybody wants, somebody to speak. So.
Yeah, all the local user groups are looking for people to speak. Then you got the SQL Saturdays are going virtual, the different conferences that aren't SQL Saturday that are spun off by themselves. And then you've got, the virtual chapters as well. So you just got to find something that you want to talk about. And then writing a presentation is the fun part. That takes a long time, depending on your topic and how well you know it. Or you can write one in under 3 weeks like I'm doing right now.
Oh, what's the topic?
SQL Server configuration with DBA and DBA tools.
Oh, okay. Well, you already know that.
I know, but it's like, I wish they made the selection not like under 3 weeks before the SQL Saturday, Give a little notice.
That's true.
Because like I was gone 2 of those weekends, so like I only had this past weekend to actually work on it full time.
Right. Yeah, that's one of the things I've noticed, that conferences have not been as great since everything's gone virtual, they have not been great about giving speakers lead time.
Yeah, I've noticed that as well. And I put in like 2 presentations I hadn't done before or written yet into that particular conference. And I was just glad they didn't pick 2 of them now. Because I hate to disappoint, because I contacted them to try to switch it out to something I've already did. And they were going to look at it. And that was last Thursday, and I haven't heard back from them yet. So I'm assuming I'm doing the one that they selected.
It'd be awkward otherwise.
Well, the other one's written that I wanted, that I asked to switch to. So, we'll just check the schedule ahead of time and figure one way or the other, I'll have 2 presentations and,
Right.
So, but when writing a presentation, you do want to kind of set out an outline and just kind of fill it in. And then sometimes you end up adding stuff and finding stuff. And then you got to do your demos. And being a new person, you may want to try to record the demos or do screenshots of them so that you don't have to switch back and forth and then get brave and start typing the demos. No, I don't really do that. But I haven't gotten to where I record my demos yet, but I haven't had software to do that with. Now I do. So I might do that one day. I don't know. Am I talking too much? Someone's laughing.
No, I just read what Icon Pro had to say. It was good. So as you actually, speaking of pre-recording demos, yeah, that is something that I haven't seen much of in the SQL world, but would make a lot of sense. I see it a lot more often in cybersecurity, in the security world, where those presentations tend to be pre-recorded because it's hard to do a live demo. You have to set up circumstances just right, and it can be easy for a demo to fail. So better to pre-record it and talk over it. Yeah, there's no problem with pre-recording demos like that. You can get confident and start doing it live and then have the fallback option. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Tracy. That's a good idea to do.
Or just in case your laptop crashes like mine did last year before I did my presentation right at Summit and I had to rebuild it the week of Summit.
That's also not a circumstance you want to be in.
Now everything just goes into the cloud and has backups. So
yeah, hardware failures are fun. I've had projector bulbs explode. Yeah, laptops die. Laptops fail to connect to projectors.
Yeah.
I've had computers reboot and install Windows updates in the middle of a presentation.
Yeah.
That was awkward.
Yeah. Even Bob Ward's had that happen one time.
Yeah. Power outages.
Yeah, you get those all the time. That's just normal for Kevin, power outages.
Fire drill. That was a fun presentation.
So I just get all the bad flights, and you just get bad stuff happening in your presentations. Is that what this is amounting to?
That's why I have a backpack full of equipment. Like I have a mini projector. I have a spare laptop. I have all kinds of different cables and adapters. I have spare HDMI cables that I've had to use at a SQL Saturday once because the HDMI cable failed. Just stuff you build up over time that, it would be great if I had one of these. So I go buy another one. So, Tracy, what is your checklist, standard operating procedure before doing a presentation?
Before I do my presentation, well, I double check my slide deck and always run through it and make sure I can remember what I was going to say for each slide deck or each slide as I go through. And then I run through every demo, make sure it works, and then reset my machine for whatever I need to reset it to so that I can run through it when I go to do the presentation. And then I go through my slide deck a third time or second time because I get really nervous about forgetting what I want to say on each slide deck or going too fast or skipping stuff so that's my general practice for when I'm giving a presentation. I usually go over it like earlier in the week, the day before, the hour right before the session.
Right. So when you give a talk, Are you generally, say, telling the same story every time? Are you intending to essentially say the same words for each slide, or does it change?
That will depend on whether I've worked on something on that particular subject since the last time I gave the talk. Like if I have a different story because I've worked on something different that's related to it and it relates to that slide, they may get a different story than what they did last time. So it's mainly like for query store, sometimes the examples will change for how we go about using it or what I've done to what I've used it for.
Mm-hmm.
But I have a slide that tells me, hey, you can use it for, forcing queries. And then I'll tell different times I've forced queries and it helped with this problem or that problem, or say Christmas Eve is my favorite one. It did. Your boss paged me on Christmas Eve, Marla. And within 10 minutes, I forced the query and went back to Christmas Eve. So query store to the rescue.
My boss or my colleague? I think you may be thinking
Marshall.
of my colleague, but that's fine.
No,
Marshall paged you.
Yeah,
Ah,
your boss.
okay.
So that's my favorite story to tell. And then I do but if I've used it since, we don't use query store where I'm at now, so I can't make up any new stories. But if I'm using a technology that I use now, my stories I tell about using it will change over time, or a different one will pop in my brain and that'll be what gets told. But the technical details I try to leave about the same wordage every time, but they always come out different. I don't write a script or anything like that.
Right.
I just kind of go off the top of my head and just kind of have the slides to help me remember what in general I wanted to say.
That makes sense. Even if you are really nervous, it's your first time presenting, it's a good idea not to have a strict script. You want to have like what Tracy's saying, you want to have an outline, structure of, here are the stories I'm going to tell, here are the anecdotes I want to say, here's what I want to talk about on the slide. But don't feel like you have to read a script, because unless you are really good at it, reading from a script sounds stilted and scripted, and that really bores people.
I think it would make you more nervous too, because then if you feel like you got it memorized and then you accidentally get off, to me that would scare the daylights out of me if I had memorized this whole thing to do for a presentation and then all of a sudden I noticed that I did not do something correctly. Then I would just probably freak out for the rest of the presentation.
Right. How do I get back on track? Yeah. So Icon Pro says, interesting speakers have a background story that pops up randomly during the main presentation. I know some people, I wish I could be one of these people. I'm fairly jealous of these people who can take a presentation that they just basically created the night before or the day of, the hour before, and tell a story, go through there, just nail it, make it look like it's something they've done dozens of times in the past. I tend to work pretty hard to make it look like I do that, but in reality, it's a lot of practice. It's going through this quite a few times, practicing this, understanding the flows between slides, understanding the transitions, understanding where I can tell what I can tell when, so that it sounds natural. That is there's actually a fair amount of effort to get to that point, but you don't have to be at that point. You have information, if you have something to share, that's good enough. And I think I've never seen a case where people actively root against a presenter.
No.
So
I never seen a presenter get booed or anything. So
yeah, that doesn't happen.
I would not say root against a presenter. I have seen an antagonistic audience, and it was for a reason. I have seen one where
so
Joe Silco wrongly antagonistic at the summit. I felt sorry for him. It was back in the days when he was being very nasty to a lot of people online, and they took it out on him on the presentation.
All the people online
I know if you're dealing with your potential audience anywhere, be nice to them, even if they're stupid. Don't do that.
So Mala also typed in chat here, one of the best that you've seen is an impromptu by Joey D'Antoni, where his laptop broke down. He converted it into a discussion, spoke impromptu all the way. So another case, there was a past summit where Laden, his laptop broke, and all he had was a whiteboard, and he had to do a fairly complicated topic. I think it was around security or column store. It was something complex enough that essentially he's like drawing it all out on the whiteboard.
Yeah, I'm not that good.
Yeah, that is where somebody who is very confident in the material is able to adapt, improvise, overcome. That's don't feel like that's the normal case. It is not normal, thankfully. But it is a interesting exercise. Like, can you do a presentation if you didn't have the slides, if you didn't have the code? Could you still do a reasonable talk? If you cannot remember enough of your themes, that would indicate that is probably gonna have to practice some more. You don't have to memorize every slide, have it seared as an image in your brain, but having an idea of this is the main topic. This is the type of material that I want to share with you. This is what I have learned. You don't have that, practice a bit more. And if you do get caught in that situation, it's a lot less scary. So Mala, presentation horror stories. I know you've got at least one.
Horror stories. Wait. Well, I have had things like demos don't work, which is not exactly a horror story because it happens so often to so many people. That's been my somewhat limited experience with presenting. That's been the worst thing that's happened to me. Is a couple of times my demos, which I was totally confident was doing good, didn't work. You guys may have more because you just present more.
I've got plenty. Tracy?
Evidently, you've got the most though, because I just get the flight troubles. But mine was at Summit last year when my Linux machine got corrupted somehow or the other, and I had to rebuild it at the hotel and over slow Wi-Fi and download all the software over very, very slow Wi-Fi to build it again.
Reminds me of a story of mine. Yeah. But you've also had SQL Saturday Raleigh. I remember one of the places we were at.
What happened? I don't remember that one because Summit traumatized me so bad.
I think it was one of the years we were at William Peace University. And you were in a room where nothing was working right. I think it was projector problems and connection problems.
I think we got them resolved though.
We did. It took a little while, but
I just started talking.
that's actually all right. So in reality, if you ever catch yourself in that problem, that's the best thing to do. Just go on, talk naturally, especially if somebody else is working on the problem. Start your presentation. Hopefully you have enough of the intro that I can say, hello, my name is whoever, and this is the topic. While that's getting worked on, let's just talk through some of the ideas. I was at one SQL Saturday where it took like 15 minutes for the projector issues to get resolved because this one, the projector was left on during lunch and it overheated. So it had to cool off before they could restart it. So that was like 15 minutes in. So for the first 15 minutes, I can tell you what's on the slide. Let me tell you a story, and you can't see the slides, but that's okay. Got a different SQL Saturday where the projector just didn't work, but it was okay because they had a 20-some inch monitor that I could turn around. It was like, okay, everybody huddle on close and look at this because that projector's not working today. So you know, sorry, here's the link. If you want to grab the slides yourself, here's the link because they're available. Had a pre-con where projector bulb exploded with about 20-30 minutes left in the pre-con. So we said that's a sign it's time to leave. Different pre-con happened during one of those snowstorms in Seattle. So they had to cancel the SQL Saturday, but the snowstorm didn't happen until after the pre-con had actually gone on. And I was headed further west. If I remember, I was headed to China right afterward. So I didn't want to skip it all. I've had all kinds of things. All kinds of fun stuff.
That Raleigh thing only lasted maybe 5 minutes or so. So it's just like I just started talking, and then when the slides came up, because people were all over the computer, I just kind of went in there and figured out what I needed to go back and remember that I didn't remember on the slides and progress forward. So that was nothing in comparison to last year.
Yeah, that's.
I'm used to the projectors not working for the first 5 minutes or so. That's just, especially if you're first in the morning. I think that was my first time presenting too.
Right. I believe that was correct. So was that like 5 years ago? The snowstorm in Seattle was, I think, 2017, 2018, one of those two.
Yeah, I think that was my first time presenting ever, was at SQL Saturday. Because that's the first time I ever presented was at SQL Saturday Raleigh.
I think you're right. I think that was the first time. And stuff happens.
And I got so nervous I finished in 45 minutes.
Remember something happening with SQL Saturday Redmond once Winter Snowmageddon. Yeah, that was the SQL Saturday. It all got canceled. I ended up having to drive to the airport. I drove to the airport Saturday morning to fly down to LA so that I could fly to China. I got that pushed ahead a day because, well, originally I was going to fly on Sunday, and then they didn't have a Saturday, so got out of Dodge. And the funny thing was, it was only about an inch or so of snow. So I was out there driving, maybe 2 inches of snow. I was out there driving, like, as long as you don't drive like an idiot, not too bad. I understand if you're in a very hilly area, because they don't salt the roads, they don't maintain the roads the way that Midwesterners and Northeasterners have learned to do. They don't have the equipment to do all that. It's understandable, but, staying on the highway, it was no problem.
Good thing I was there. You might not have made your flight to China.
That would have been bad. So yeah, I think that was 2018, now that I think about it. But let's wrap up with Mala's Book Corner.
So I have 2 books today. Like, 1 second, let me pull up because none of them are physical books. They're all ebooks, so I can show you what they look like. Okay, where did I put it? 1 second. Yeah, here we are. So the first one, my colleague at work, Mark, the lead of our DBA team, he was asking about what is the latest book on internals. That's how this came up. Previously, when we used to have SQL Server releases regularly, once every couple of years or so, there used to be an internals book from Microsoft Press accompanying it, written by usually a handful of people, Paul Randall, Kellen Delaney, all of them. That has stopped a little while. The last one, the last book on internals that I kept, Pro SQL Server Internals, and I absolutely don't know how to say the name of this author. The name of this book is Pro SQL Server Internals by Dimitri. I think I got his first name right, and I won't attempt the last name.
Dimitri
but it's a great book. Sorry?
Dmitry Korotkovich.
Okay. I don't know which part of the world he's from, but you happen to know him?
Yeah, he's from the part of the world known as Florida. So
really, okay.
Yeah, he's actually out of the Tampa, if I remember right, the Tampa area. I see him at a lot of SQL Saturdays in Florida. He's an extremely smart guy.
Yes. It's a very well written book. It's it has all the stuff that you can expect from any book on SQL Server internals, starting with the basics. The two chapters that I will make special mention of, which I really liked, was the one on deadlocking, which he goes into a lot of detail and covers every possible scenario with it. The only other person I have seen go into that degree of detail is Jonathan Kahayas. But he covers pretty much everything that Jonathan explains in that chapter. So it is definitely worth reading for that. And the second one is the one on extended events, especially for those of us struggling with the transition from profiler to extended events. And I'm still struggling there. But this book is a great introduction and a start with all the basics of external events laid out. But it's written at the time of SQL Server 2014, so it's not totally up to date. But a lot of internal stuff has not changed, and it is definitely worth your time to pick it up and keep it handy. And I personally don't think there will be any more books on internals coming out. At least the famous authors who used to do them are definitely not going to be doing anymore. So hang on to this for as long as it's valid. I don't think after that there will be too many coming out. So that's the first book. The second one is called Algorithms to Live By. It is written by a couple of people. I don't know their names. You can look them up. But it is a really entertaining book. And this book, he goes into taking a few commonly used computer algorithms and comparing them to life situations, if or not they are workable. And the two that I would like to demonstrate is one is called the 37% algorithm, which is about when do you stop when you have a decision to make with regards to many things. When you want to hire a new person, when you're dating, and you're trying to find someone to be with, and even when you're trying to park somewhere in a busy area, when do you say, okay, I'm done, okay, this is it, and I'm going to leave it here and go from there. And the 37% algorithm is that it says that the percentage at which this happens typically is when you have narrowed it down to about 37% of total choices, and then you say you're done and you don't want to go any further. And he pulls up a lot of examples and case studies, and he tries to demonstrate that this can also be true of real life, that about 40%, 37 to 40, about 40% attempt you make. And beyond that, you're trying to either, you're going to be presented the same choices again, or you're going to say, none of this is going to work. No, let's start all over again. One of the two. And he demonstrates with a lot of examples why stopping at 37% is a great idea, not just as a computer algorithm. That is one thing. And the second one is that what he calls stay out algorithm. That is whether you persist with the same choice or you move to a different choice. And for this, he takes an example of slot machines in Vegas and such. Like, if you win at one slot machine, do you keep playing at the same machine or do you move on to another one? So the theory behind this algorithm is that if you stick with the same thing until you lose, you have a better chance at winning. So that's one thing. And the last one is what we're all very common with is the sorting algorithms, right? And the advantages of bubble sort versus the more effective insertion sort. And what do you do when you have a pile of books or a big pile of clothes or things like that to sort? So which works better? That kind of clearly, a bubble sort is going to be very frustrating for that. So a lot of examples like that. And it's a really entertaining, nice book to read. And I really enjoyed it. So those are my two books.
Right. Links to both of those are in chat. They'll be in the show notes as well. So with that, we are going to wrap up for this evening. Thank you so much, Tracy and Mala, for being here tonight. Thank you, everybody in chat. Have a wonderful evening. Remember, tomorrow, Brian Shalloway is going to be talking to us about R and SQL, or R and database integration. Not necessarily just SQL Server, any database platform, but using dbplyr to integrate R with the database. So stop on by for that. And next time.